Hi there, and welcome to this first in a series of videos on how to write essays. In this first video, we're going to have a look at the topic of the academic writing style. And the reason we're starting with this topic is that, well, essay writing is a skill. And like any other skill, you need to start with the basics first before you move on to more advanced topics. So in this video, we're going to have a look at defining what we mean by the academic writing style. What's its main characteristics? What's expected of you? We're also going to have a look at examples of the academic writing style in practice. So the idea is that having watched this video, you will not only be clearer on what constitutes the academic writing style, but you'll also know how to achieve an academic style of writing in your own written work.
So I'm going to switch to PowerPoint now so I can show you some examples of text and we can kind of look at those with respect to the academic writing style and come to some kind of agreement as to what constitutes good practice and not so good practice when you're learning how to articulate things in the academic writing style. So before we get started, it's worth reflecting on what you think the main characteristics of the academic writing style are. From your exposure to things like books and journal articles and conference proceedings and even essays thus far, you'll have developed an intuitive idea about what it is that constitutes the academic writing style. But of course, those ideas may be right or wrong. So for the first 5 minutes, just think about what you would define as the academic writing style. What are its main characteristics? Make a note of them, and then at the end of the video you can compare your notes to the things that we've been discussing and look for what's the same, what's different, whether there were things you expected or didn't expect that cropped up. And that was a good way of kind of reflecting on the information and consolidating what it is you've learned throughout the course of this video. Now what you can do, obviously, because it's a video, is whenever you get an activity like this or I ask you to do something, just hit the pause button and then press play when you're ready to resume. So here's the first piece of text for you to have a look at. Press pause on the video, spend a couple of minutes having a look through this text and see if you can identify what the problem with it is from an academic style point of view. And one of the things you might have noticed with this particular piece of text is that the author has used the first person perspective quite a bit. Let's pick out a few examples here. In my view, indeed, I would suggest. As psychologists, we need. So a couple of examples there of the author using the first person perspective. And the first person perspective tends to be a bit frowned on in academic writing, and that's really for a couple of reasons. The first of those reasons is quite well summed up by this particular picture. If you take a first person perspective on something, then your viewpoints tend to be centered around yourself. They tend to be your own viewpoints, your own thoughts on a matter, your own perspectives, your own favourite theories about a particular topic, rather than actually looking at other perspectives, other arguments and other viewpoints. And a really easy way of getting yourself to decenter, if you like, is to use the third person perspective, which is then much more conducive with inviting other viewpoints, other perspectives into the argument. So that's the first reason. If you use a third person perspective, you're much more likely to start formulating your arguments such that they consider other viewpoints and other perspectives. The second reason it's a good idea to use the third person perspective rather than the first person perspective is that if you use a first person perspective, it tends to be more conducive with making your writing more informal. And as we'll find out, formality is something which is expected in the academic style of writing. So by using the third person perspective, you're effectively, achieving two things. You're not only kind of avoiding making a faux pas of using the first person perspective, which is, part of the battle on the road to becoming, someone who's got a good grasp of the academic style. But it also then helps you towards another aspect of the academic style, which is maintaining a degree of formality in your composition. So make sure when you're writing an academic piece that you try and avoid the first person and use the third person as much as possible. So here's another piece of writing for you to have a look at, and you might notice straight away that it's making the same point as the previous piece of writing. But pause the video, read this text through, and see if you think that it's an improvement on the previous piece of writing. And if you do think it's an improvement, try and think of a reason or two as to why it's an improvement. And then resume the video when you're ready to continue. So what you might notice in the piece of writing on the screen now is that the author has avoided using the first person perspective. But interestingly, what you might also notice is the first thing they've done is made it clear that they're articulating their own opinion. And this puts to rights one of the common misconceptions about the third person, which is that, well, yeah, but if I use the third person, surely I can't have an opinion or express an opinion on something. And that's simply not the case. All it means is you refer to yourself as the author in the third person. So here you can see the person has said, in the author's view. So they're expressing an opinion, but they're referring to themselves in the third person. So here's another piece of writing for you to have a look at. Again, just pause the video, have a look at this piece of writing and see if you can figure out what the problem is from an academic style point of view. So one thing you might notice about this piece of writing is the absence of evidence being used in the composition. So let's take you through a couple of examples. Some have pointed to the presence of bias. Well, some, who are we referring to exactly here? What kind of research is being referred to? Some is extremely vague and really isn't going to help the reader to establish if the point being made can be substantiated or not. Another one. Research has shown. Again, what research? Done by whom and when? It's really important that if you're going to refer to research that you are explicit about, what that research is and who did it, and you're providing citations so that people can follow up and again make sure the point you're making is, or can be substantiated. And that's really the issue that's gone on here, is that the person seems to have relied on kind of hearsay or sort of, he said, she said, they said kind of, evidence in their composition. And that's something that's frowned upon in the academic style. What we like to see in the academic style is people making points that are being substantiated with respect to evidence, not just sort of throwing out there of it's well known that, or some have said that, or some research has shown that. So here's another piece of writing for you to have a look at. Pause the video, have a look at it, and think about whether you think this is an improvement on the previous piece of text in terms of the academic writing style. Then resume the video when you're ready to continue. So hopefully one of the things you'll notice about this piece of writing is that they've avoided using expressions like some have said that, or it's well known that, or research has shown that. Instead, they've used a particular citation to back up the point being made. And you can see that here, Orne in 1962. And that's an important feature of the academic writing style, the use of evidence to back up assertions. And the way to look out for this is to scan your work and look out for ambiguous phrases like research has shown that, some have said, it's well known that. And if you're using those kind of, phrases, make sure that you replace them with a specific example of research that illustrates the point you're trying to make. So here's another piece of text for you to have a look at. So pause the video, have a look over the text and see if you can identify what the problem is with respect to the academic writing style. Then just resume the video when you're ready to continue. So one thing you might notice about this piece of writing is that it's not the message per se that seems to be off, it's more the tone. And I think the tone appearing to be a bit off with respect to the academic writing style is largely due to some key choices in vocabulary. So let's pick up on a few of these. Confidence in social psychology has gone up and down over the years. Its reliance on the scientific method to get rid of bias has thrown up, sounds nasty, other things that need to be checked out. Now, again, you kind of roughly know what the person is getting at here, but the choice of words does seem off, doesn't it? And when we talk about the importance of using the appropriate tone, and writing for the the audience, the intended readership, it's not just us being pedantic or trying to kind of maintain a stiff and starchy and very stuffy kind of academic writing style. It's the reason we ask for a formal tone is to try and ensure that the work can be readily understood by the audience and to remove ambiguity. So when you're using expressions, for example, like midlife crisis, that might be salient to a Western audience, for example, but it might not really be a thing from someone from a different culture or a different part of the world. When you're using terms like thrown up, then that obviously has more than one meaning, and one of those meanings is actually quite unpleasant. And those kind of things detract from the ease with which your work can be understood. So that's why we kind of say keep things formal. Now, it's important to note that's not the same as just throwing terminology unnecessarily at your work. That's the last thing you should do. You shouldn't just be using long, complicated, or esoteric words to sound good. The important thing is using terminology when it makes your work clearer and easier to understand, and trying to avoid using terminology, words, or phraseology that could have multiple meanings or be misinterpreted from people from a different background to you. So the idea of keeping things formal is to try and ensure that things can be readily understood by as broad an audience as possible. So here's another piece of writing for you to have a look at. Again, it's making the same point as the previous piece of writing, but it's been articulated differently. Do you think this is an improvement on the previous piece of writing? And if so, why? Pause the video so you have a chance to have a look at this piece of writing and think about it, and then hit play when you're ready to resume. Now, one of the things you'll notice with this piece of writing is they've removed all of those slightly ambiguous or informal terms that the previous piece of writing had used and replaced them with more precise formal equivalents. So let's go over a couple of examples. Confidence in social psychology has fluctuated, whereas before they said gone up and down. Its reliance on scientific method to eliminate bias rather than get rid of bias has generated other issues that merit examination rather than need to be checked out. You might recall after that in the previous piece they'd used the term midlife crisis, whereas now they haven't used that and have just simply said it's came under scrutiny for reliance on experimental methodology. So right there you can see that just by changing a few words for their more formal equivalents, or removing sayings that might be specific to a particular culture or part of the world or demographic or background, they made that piece a lot clearer and a lot less ambiguous than it otherwise would have been. So making your writing formal doesn't necessarily mean tearing it up and starting from scratch. Sometimes it's just a matter of the choice of vocabulary or the choice of phraseology, and that can be altered actually fairly quickly. So that's it for part 1 of this video. If you want to learn more about the academic writing style, be sure to catch part 2, which will be available shortly. Please do subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up if you're enjoying my videos. And if you're interested in learning when I post new content, don't forget to turn the notifications on.